Welcome to the Dancing into Brain Health podcast. I am your host, Magda Kaczmarska. Our sense of smell and taste shape some of life's most meaningful and pleasurable experiences. From the perfume of a spring day to the familiar aroma of our grandmother's apple pie. Yet we rarely stop to consider how deeply these everyday sensory experiences are connected to the brain and its health. We are joined today by Dr. Rona Graham, a neuroscientist whose research explores olfactory function as an early biomarker for cognitive impairment. Her work is illuminating how this often overlooked sensory process is intimately tied not only to the richness of our daily lives, but also to cognition, memory, and overall brain health. Dr. Graham is the Associate Professor in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences and member of the Research Center on Aging at the University of Sherbrooke in Quebec. The overall goal of Professor Graham's health science research program is to delineate mechanisms in the pathogenesis, or the origins, of neurodegenerative diseases, leading to therapies that can halt the progression or even lead to a cure for such disorders. Dr. Graham, it is such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Magda. It's so wonderful to see you again. It was such a wonderful connection that we had at the Alzheimer disease meeting a few years ago, and I'm so glad that we've been able to keep this connection.
I'm also super grateful, and I think it was incredible serendipity that we ended up presenting on the same panel. I want to send a massive shout out to ADI, Alzheimer's Disease International, on how they organize and structure these conversations, because they really thought about interdisciplinary collaboration and representation around different topics. I recall our conversation was about different non-pharmacological interventions and approaches to support neurodegenerative conditions. If they hadn't thought about that, we would never have met. It's so fascinating because your work seems completely removed from the type of work that I engage in, and yet when we start to talk, we realize there's actually very strong connection. So I'm grateful to ADI for making that spark, and I'm thankful to you for being so open to engage and continue our conversation and to join us today. I'm really excited. What you do is something that many of us, really myself included, don't often think about as a connection to brain health. I think about sense of sight and hearing. They have even been included in the modifiable risk factor presentations in the Lancet Commission recently. But we don't often think about our sense of smell and taste as actually also being connected to our brain. All of our senses are. So I'm so thrilled that we get a chance to dive into that. But before we go in, I wanted to shine a little bit of a light on you. I know that you're amazing, but I want our listeners to get a chance to hear a bit about your story from your own words. What you do is really unique. So I'd love to hear what drew you into this field, into researching neurodegenerative conditions, and kind of what brought you to this work today.
I'm going to tell you, Magda, a little bit about my background getting into it also, because I didn't have a straightforward route to becoming a professor. And you don't necessarily have to. Some people feel it's undergraduate and things like that. But it's not necessarily. When I was in high school, I was in biology class. I was fascinated by biology, genetics. I was also very much into mathematics and physics, so very much into pure and applied sciences. And in Quebec, after high school, you do 2 years before undergraduate. So I did pure and applied sciences. So even more diving into that. And then my undergraduate at the University of Concordia, I did biology and physics. So getting more into the brain, getting more into disease, getting into genetic diseases, and just really loving it. After that, I was a technician for a while. I was at a cytogenetic clinic in Montreal. I was with Professor Michael Hayden as a technician in his research lab. I went to Saudi Arabia for 4 years, and I ran a cytogenetic clinic in Saudi Arabia and helped them set up a molecular genetics clinic. So kind of very varied, right? And then once my daughter was a certain age, Michael and I had been talking, maybe come and do your PhD. So then I did. And Michael Hayden, he's a very big scientist in the field of Huntington's disease. And Huntington's is a genetic disease, and there is neurodegeneration in the brain. So I was very interested in doing something like that. It ticked a lot of boxes for me, working in health, working in the brain. So I did a master's PhD combined with him. And then in my postdoctoral fellowship, that's what you do after your PhD, I did more work on Huntington, but I also layered in some Alzheimer's, some stroke. And at that time, to be honest, Magda, I did a lot of molecular neurobiology, so looking at mechanisms, but also getting more into working with live humans, as I say, besides just tissue, you know what I mean? I just love it. And so that's kind of where it all got started.
I love that. I don't know if we had talked about this previously, and I don't even know if I've talked about this on this podcast, but my start into this work was also very technically. I studied biochemistry and molecular biophysics, and I've always been really fascinated with how things work. And even as an undergraduate, I was starting to train, and then I eventually ran a cell culture laboratory. And then I did immunohistochemistry. So also this very technical work that help kind of unravel and understand mechanisms, which always end up inevitably leading or hopefully eventually leading to something that actually applies to humans. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And I also think that it's really important because you are able to bring that really specific molecular innovation and then really understand that into how it can be from the micro into the macro.
And for me, I want to see that. I want to see those changes just coming from that way. Obviously, behavioral changes is great. You want to see that as well. But when I can see some things on that molecular level or within the brain, then in terms of convincing scientists, convincing clinicians, convincing grants, when I can show those graphs and say, look, that's what it showed, it's even more powerful. So yes, you're absolutely right. And it really does help for sure.
As we were preparing for this conversation, you had mentioned that you have really reached a point where this year is what you would call your year of translation. I love that you called it that. Thinking about not just those mechanisms, but then what do we do with that information? Can you share a little bit what that means for you, that entering into a year of translation and your line of work?
Sure. And thank you for asking that. What we mean by translation, knowledge translation in the scientific field is getting that information, what I learned, how that impacts the human, how that impacts the public, getting that information to the public so I can empower them. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, that takes a long time in science. It's very frustrating. We don't get enough time for that. We're always scrambling to get grants, to get money. It's so hard to get the money and keep the whole thing running. And certainly we present our work at scientific conferences, and that's where I met you. And one of the reasons I do love the ADI conference, the Alzheimer's Disease International Conference, is because you have the researchers, clinician importantly, a lot of different health professionals, and even some patient or family people. And that's really important because then I do get that crossover. Because it's also important for me to hear from the patient. They will tell me things. I'm not a clinician. I'm a PhD. So I don't get that. And they can say something really important. They'll really tweak me in my work. So the year of translation, I'm really trying to focus on getting this message out. I want people to know it. What they do with the information is up to them. I do feel it's critical information. And so that's what I'm calling it the year of translation. I just want to empower the public to at least have that information.
I love that you're thinking that way. It's wonderful to have an insight into that process because I think many of us don't think about just how involved the work of a researcher like yourself is, and how many kind of systemic barriers exist. And so to first recognize that those barriers exist and then to take an initiative to navigate through and around those barriers, I think is so important. And like what you said, it's a relational exchange. It's a conversation, hopefully, where all of this work that you've been doing and this information and clarity that you're gaining through your research can inspire individuals who have lived experience or practitioners in various approaches. But then also maybe they will actually have something, like you said, that can inspire a different avenue of work for you. That's spectacular.
And certainly more of the grants now, Magda, are asking, what's your knowledge translation plan? What are you going to do? Are you going to write some lay summaries? You're going to do a podcast, and that's great because it means the granting agencies are recognizing, well, this is important. What are you going to do? And that obviously takes some time. So I need some time for that to prepare for, to put it together. So we are getting there. That's why I love those kind of conferences where you get that mix because it's fun. And it's really, really helpful.
I'm glad that grant funding agencies are thinking about that. I'm really fortunate that I grew up in a scientific community, but many people don't understand what researchers do. And I think we're even seeing it today, that lack of understanding and regular interconnection with one another and regular dialogue leads to either distrust or kind of a lack of recognition of value. So I'm excited to have a conversation and to hear that there are more conversations like this being had so that we can better appreciate the work that you do and also understand how that work can influence our day.
And you hit a good point because when I was telling some friends and people, it's my year of translation, they totally didn't take it the way I know it. So translation just a language or something like that, but you know what I mean? So that was really good to know that information. Okay, I have to explain myself better. What am I talking about? So that's again where those kind of connection, interdisciplinary, all that is very important.
Oh, well, it is kind of a translation, right? It is a little bit like a translation of a language. Researchers, clinicians, everybody speaks a slightly different language, but we're all tend to be talking about the same thing. I'm excited. So let's start with the sense of smell. We started off by understanding that this is a big part of your research, is understanding this mechanism and its implications in our brain and also in neurodegenerative conditions. But I don't really even hear about the fact that our sense of smell is connected. Obviously, when you sit down to think about it, of course, everything's connected to our brain. But my eyesight, for example, I instantly think about that. I can even point to the part of my head that I know is connected to that mechanism. But when I think about my sense of smell, that's not a space that I go to, even though our sense of smell is so vitally connected to how we navigate our lives. My sense of smell is not just something that drives my everyday experience, but it's also connected deeply to powerful and meaningful memories. Every single time I smell Nivea, I think about my grandmother because she used that blue tin Nivea cream. That smell is forever linked to my grandmother. The smell of a certain perfume or a certain spice can evoke a very powerful memory of a lived experience from your childhood or a really meaningful moment in your life. I wonder if we could unpack that a little bit. Maybe first, can you share with us a little bit, what is the olfactory process? What is that mechanism?
So basically, when you smell something, those odor molecules, those are chemical structures. They're little odor molecules, and they're going up into your nose, direct route right into the brain, right? And they're going up to the nasal cavity, and that's where you have the olfactory epithelium. And within that olfactory epithelium, you breathe in those molecules, and they hit what we call olfactory receptor cells. And a receptor, it will grab on to that molecule. It's not going to grab any molecule. It's like a lock and a key. So if it sees its odor molecule, it will grab it. And then it will translate that through the cribriform plate into the olfactory bulb and to the deep brain regions. So that triggers an event. That receptor binding to the odor molecule triggers the neurons. And how neurons talk to each other is almost like an electrical activity. A threshold is breached and it hits the next neuron and it hits the next neuron and it goes all the way down into the brain. So the olfactory bulb then sends it to what we call the primary olfactory cortex. So the brain's made up into a number of different brain regions and different functions. And for the primary olfactory cortex, it's the entorhinal cortex, the piriform cortex, and the amygdala, among others.
And you mentioned that there's odor receptors that are very specific, almost like a Lego piece, or a specific shape for a specific odor. So do we have a set number of receptors, or do we build new receptors? Can we acquire new senses?
Let me perhaps rephrase that. So some receptors bind a ligand, that thing that it mixes with, we call that a ligand, just one. But actually, the olfactory receptors can pick up more than one. They don't
Okay.
have a broad every single one, but they can pick up more than one. And that's part of the process, okay, which receptors picked up on those odor molecule to at the end of the day in the back brain there, oh, you're actually smelling an orange. There's about 400 of those receptors. That's not very many considering we have millions and millions that we can smell actually. Smell is important. It was even more important thousands of years ago. It's very primal, but it is important even today. And I think people realize that with COVID when we lost it.
So you were saying that obviously during COVID, we realized just how important that sense of smell is. We established that there's about 400 receptors. And are we
Yeah.
all born with those 400 receptors, or do we accumulate them over life, or do we lose them?
So no, we have olfactory receptor genes, and a certain number of them have been looked at and sorted. We actually see the olfactory receptor genes being expressed not just in the nasal cavity and that epithelium, but also we see some expression in the brain, which is really interesting. And so there's work on that as well. We're still unpacking a lot of that. There's few odors, and now that signal is going and saying orange or things like that. Also, is there specificity within smelling that orange and where it's going in the brain versus you're smelling a rose and where that's going in the brain? It's not necessarily all to the same place. In my work, I'm starting to see some differences in specificity of the sense of smell.
This is fascinating, but also I have a ton of questions. One thing, you started mentioning some of the regions, and you said that they're in the deep brain. I'd love for you to explain what do you mean by the deep brain? But also, I heard you mention the amygdala, which isn't the amygdala connected to emotions, perhaps?
Yes, exactly.
I started by considering how, for me, my sense of smell is really connected to memories, or at least certain smells are.
Yeah.
Not all smells evoke. Some smells just make me really annoyed, but I definitely have an emotional reaction to them. Some of them, and in order to be able to recall a sense of smell, so let's say I'm walking around and I smell something that I like, I'm able to say, oh, that smells like magnolia. Must be a magnolia somewhere. So that recall, I would imagine, is a sense of memory. So how is our sense of smell connected to memory? And it sounds like it's also connected to emotions. What are some of those mechanisms, and how are they all linked?
We're talking about deep brain. It's kind of deep buried in the brain, actually, if you just want to think about it that way. Regions like the hippocampus and the piriform cortex, those regions are deep in there, shall we say. For the amygdala, yes, you bring up a good point. That's part of the limbic system, and it's an emotional processing center. And you can imagine, let's think thousands of years ago, humans are out foraging. It would be critical that they could smell blood, smell something decomposing, smell smoke. That has to trigger a very powerful response. It can be emotional in whatever way, but it's got to be powerful because that needs to come back. That memory has to come back later if it happened again. The other thing is that at that time they would obviously have to smell food and know where, that would be critical for survival. So some of this is going back very primal, really. It's also connected with the hippocampus. So where does that memory link come in? That's a lot coming from the hippocampus and those connections. And there's many different types of memory. It's not just one type of memory. It's linking those two together so that you remember later. And of course, thousands of years ago, it was critical for survival, but it's also very important for survival today. It's an important sense that we need, and it's helpful for us. I'm walking down the street and I pass the bakery and I can smell they're making cookies, and those are my grandmother's cookies, and that's 4 decades ago, and I'm right back there. I could even probably describe where I was almost. And so that shows you how powerful that is. And you can almost see those synapses popping. So if this is not working, well, those synapses are not popping as well, and we'll get into that a bit later. But you can see why it needs to be so strongly connected, because these can be critical things that you need to be aware of, risks or fun things, like you said. That's really good for your body to be happy and feel happy.
But what I'm hearing you say is almost that a sense of smell can serve as an anchor for other memory. You illustrated it perfectly, right? It's not just that sense of smell makes me say, oh, those are cookies, but those are my grandmother's cookies. And I am now recalling what the living room in my grandmother's house looked like, which is not a sense of smell. That's my eyes. I'm recalling the texture of the Afghan on her sofa, or I'm recalling how I felt when she gave me a hug. So there's this embodied component. So the sense of smell was a trigger that anchored all of these other memories.
Exactly. And it's very powerful, as you know. That's all happened to us before. And then you're right back there in that memory, which is great. That's a great thing to get that brain going. And you can see over evolution, that would be very important to survive. And so, yes, it's still very much deep within us as well.
Many times when you think about memory, we're talking about neurodegenerative conditions, and some of the work that you're doing has been looking at how this really vital element and mechanism of smell is connected and linked to our brain health in relationship to some of these neurodegenerative conditions. A lot of times when we think about memory, we think about Alzheimer's disease, although that's not the only symptom that people might experience in that condition. I know that we had a conversation with somebody in our previous episodes who works with people living with Parkinson's and Lewy body disorders, a different form of dementia, and hearing that there seems to be some form of a connection to smell. And then you mentioned earlier Huntington's disease. I imagine that each of those is maybe different, or are they the same? And how is the sense of smell or our olfactory process connected with cognition or some of these neurodegenerative conditions?
So what we see with Huntington's, Alzheimer's, mild cognitive impairment, stroke, traumatic brain injury, we can say neurodegenerative. Neuro is a brain cell, neurodegeneration. One of the earliest symptoms is actually olfactory loss. Yep. You actually have to compare to age-matched controls because people do slowly lose their sense of smell with they age. But when you compare to age-matched controls, one of the earliest symptoms in those diseases is the loss of smell. And it actually occurs like in Alzheimer patients, 90%. In Parkinson's patients, they say 100%. I don't work in Parkinson, but that's what they say. So it's very prevalent. If you think of some symptoms in Alzheimer, there's some depression, there's some aggression, 30, 40%. So to have a symptom that's so highly prevalent speaks volumes. And one of the reasons I was so interested to get into that, because when you're trying to think of a therapy and helping these people, you want to go as early as possible. Let's stop this process. And I'm not going to get into this today, but it's interesting that the sense of smell links to neurogenesis, and that's where baby neurons are formed, which is actually quite important. And that just really solidified for me, I need to work in this more. So yeah, we do see that. So in those people, we see they have lower sense of smell. And you can measure it, and you'll get a number on 40. 35 and above, okay, you don't have problems. What if you're 20? What if you're 5? Now you have a problem with your sense of smell. We also know in people with mild cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer, they have problem with cognition. And you can measure that. You can take cognitive tests. And I just want to point out that there's a number of different cognitive functions. So it's not just one cognitive function, but you can do some tests and they will score not as well. And so then we started to ask the question in the scientific field. And there's a lot of reasons. Like I gave you that bakery example, right? You can see those synapses popping, but there's a lot of reasons to suggest why they can be correlated. And so they started to look at that. Okay, you have all your olfactory score, you have all your cognitive score. What's that correlation? A low olfactory, low cognition. So we saw that very strikingly. So that was really just more weight on how important olfaction is in this disease.
We've had some conversations in the past about prodromal. So looking at things that are so early, because we can't really look inside our brain. We have established a very good measure for our heart health, right?
Yeah.
Blood pressure, we can take blood and look at biomarkers in the blood that tell us, that word biomarker, like cholesterol would be a biomarker for your heart health, right? Am I saying that correctly?
Pretty much, yep.
This is an indicator of how we can measure that there might be a change that would say we should look at either a therapy or a lifestyle change so that you do not head towards the direction of a condition that could affect your well-being. But our brains, it's really difficult and not very comfortable to take cerebral spinal fluid. I've not had it done, but I've heard of people who have had it done. It's not comfortable. And there are some blood-based biomarkers that are being developed, but we really don't have a lot of ways that we can look what's going inside our brain. So we heard about gait, so walking as being something. Another colleague that we've spoken with is looking at speech. It's fabulous. And actually, we talked about our eyesight and our hearing. That has actually been identified as a modifiable risk factor as one of the 14 in the Lancet Commission.
That's right.
But you're saying that, was it 90 or 100%? 90% for people living with Alzheimer's disease, 100% of people with Parkinson's. Is that for all Lewy body or just Parkinson's disease?
That's Parkinson's disease. I don't work in Parkinson's, and there's a few types. It's like Alzheimer, to be honest. It's under an umbrella. But nonetheless, in the Parkinson's field, that's what they've shown.
It's striking to me that we aren't talking about this more, and that this is, for me, until I met you 2 years ago, I had never even considered olfaction as being so closely linked to neurodegenerative conditions. You said something also, that our sense of smell is linked to neurogenesis in our childhood. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Not in our childhood, Magda. That's just in general. Some years ago, we thought in neurogenesis in the brain. I'm not talking about the skin, and that's a lot of cells are being reborn all the time. But in the brain, for many, many decades, they thought your neurons are made when you're little, and that's it, and then you get older. But we've since realized that's actually not true. It does look like there is some neurogenesis, even in adulthood. Of course, there is as they go through teenage years, but even in adulthood. So they've done some studies that would suggest that the olfactory therapy, olfactory training, which I'll get into later, may have an impact on that neurogenesis. Why I'm so interested by it, Magda, you can think in a neurodegenerative disease, you are losing neurons, brain cells. I want to replace those. Well, if I can up the production of baby neurons, that would be very helpful. Now, a critical point in that work is that those diseases have problems in neurogenesis. Either the baby neuron is made, but then it has to differentiate, it has to mature, it has to track. There can be problem in those diseases. So that's the only thing, is we need to sort out some of those kind of things as well.
But I'm hearing you say, well, maybe we can use olfactory therapy or being able to smell something, and that would be something that could actually help neurogenesis. So actually building new neuronal connections in our brain. That seems fabulous. I'd like to go back, because you had spoken about translation earlier. When I think about translation, I think about ideas and understanding being translated into some sort of action, whether that's diagnosis or being able to understand and catch a change early. So that's what you were talking about, a prodromal or early marker. Or maybe it's to help prevent something from happening or slow it down, or potentially even to rehabilitate or cure. Can we maybe start with that first one? Could we actually utilize our sense of smell to help diagnose a neurodegenerative condition? And then should we be concerned if we're losing our sense of smell? Like, can we go and get that checked out?
First thing I wanted to say, yes, we see this olfactory dysfunction, problems with their sense of smell in those diseases. I want to clearly point out that it's not everybody who loses their sense of smell will get Alzheimer or will get mild impairment. That's not the case, but it's a certain percentage. It can be 30, 40%. If I can help 30 to 40%, there is millions of Alzheimer, mild impairment. That's a lot of people. So for us, that's a big group of people. But could we potentially use it to diagnose a neurodegenerative disease? I'll explain two things. One is that it could be used as an initial step. Right now, it's cognitive testing. And then you see the geriatric clinician, the neurologist or a doctor, and he looks at everything. He looks at your cognitive test scores. Okay, that's not very good. He's also looking at you and your symptoms and things like that to make his decision. If we did olfactory testing as a first step, that's much cheaper than doing the cognitive testing. Cognitive testing, you need to have a person who knows what they're doing to sit and do it with you, and that's expensive. Olfactory testing, we could give them the olfactory test. They could sit in the doctor's office, do it, give it back to the nurse technician, whoever would score it, and then the doctor would get all that information. If we saw that's reduced, okay, the next step is cognitive testing. That's reduced also, next step, and things like that. So it could be used as a protocol or a stepping to get to the final answer, maybe much more affordable. We are working on that, Magda. So 24% of seniors will get mild cognitive impairment. Of those, 20 to 30% will get Alzheimer. If I could know who those people were, we could really help them. We can help them even with mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer, Parkinson. So we are trying to look at building tests that would do that. But right now, a general olfactory test can be the first step. More affordable, and maybe you do it and, oh, I have a problem. Oh, but no problem with cognition. This is what you can do because it is a modifiable factor and it should be
Yes.
included on that Lancet list. And I'm working on that. I can't believe it's not on there, but I'm going to do my darndest to get it on there because it is a modifiable factor in a certain percentage of people, like anything.
Yeah.
Hearing, that's on their vision, certain percentage of people, it will help, right? So I would say yes to that question, but we need a step-by-step approach, but that would be
Yes.
much more affordable way to go
Oh,
about it.
yeah. I love what I'm hearing you say. Why I think it's so important that we have general practice doctors. We have so many specialists, but
Yeah.
a general practitioner can understand how it connects to our brain health down the line. If we have these tools and they're implemented into your annual exam, same as we're doing our heart getting checked and our blood pressure getting checked, we can do an olfactory test that can maybe help say, oh, this is changing. This has been changing more rapidly than other people. Maybe we should implement some sort of a therapy, or we should look more closely into this and catch
And
things
help
a
those
lot.
people. Yeah.
Exactly. Like catch it earlier and then be proactive about it and give people a sense of hope, right? That we don't have to wait until something gets really bad before we intervene. We can
Exactly.
actually do something and be there with you every single step of the way.
And I'm doing a feasibility study because in Canada, you have a problem with your sense of smell, you'll go to your GP. There's not much he can do. The ENTs, ears, nose, and throat doctors, they're swamped with everything else that they have to do. And so it's just not a priority. The other issue is the olfactory tests are not cheap. This is what they do in Germany. Professor Hummel, he's the one who's been doing a lot of this work, to be honest, and coming out with so much of this work over decades. In Germany, it's mandated, part of the mandated medical guidelines. If somebody comes to you and says, I have a problem with my sense of smell, they have to test it and they have to offer you olfactory therapy. They use reusable smell kit. So that makes it much more affordable. Now I can do patient few dollars instead of $30.
So let's talk about that rehabilitation. What is olfactory therapy?
So olfactory therapy, it's also called olfactory training. Basically, it's very simple techniques. From the original study, and most have followed that, you take 4 odors from the odor prism. So from the spices, we take cloves. From floral, we take rose. From citrus, we take citronella, lemon. And you need something, when you go like that, you kind of shock. So you need something like that. So we take eucalyptus. You find a quiet place to sit, use essential oils, and you smell it. Look at, okay, cloves. And you smell it for 20 seconds. I'm smelling cloves. What memories is it bringing out? I don't remember anything. Okay, when was the last time I had pumpkin pie? You dig it if you have to for the cognitive part. And do it for each one. 20 seconds. Take a break in the middle if you need to, or 2 minutes apart. You do that in the morning and you do it at night. That's all it is. We're talking a couple minutes in the morning, a couple minutes at night. And most of them have been 3 to 4 months you do this. And the changes I saw, this is other work in the literature as well, but my cohort had mild cognitive impairment, and I just don't get any worse. This is some years back. That's what I was hoping. They actually significantly improved on 3 of the 5 cognitive tests. And the controls even improved, which that window is much smaller. Even though they're 60 to 75 years of age, it's still a smaller window. And it was profound, those changes. So what we're starting to talk about in the literature is cognitive remediation, cognitive rehabilitation. So even people who have mild cognitive impairment, have Alzheimer's, have Parkinson, this can be beneficial for those people. And of course, if I could get seniors to do it, successful aging, right? There's a number of things you can do, and I'll talk about them at the end there. But if you could incorporate that into your routine. We did it for 4 months. I can see from my work, it can last about a year. There's another paper would say that also. But after that, I'm not as sure. So I would rather you just incorporate it into your daily routine, like you might already do some things for successful aging.
Oh
So
my
yeah, it's very
God.
profound. And so there's a number of studies. I do want to be clear, it doesn't hit every single cognitive function. And there's very few therapies that it's across the
Nothing's
board.
going to hit it all.
Nothing's going to hit it all, but it does hit some critical ones like executive function, memory, visual fluency, and things like that. So those are some of the important ones. So seeing some changes and other work, it might be something else that they saw. But if you layered that in with other things that could be very helpful, very affordable, and keep in mind, try to get yourself better. There's many olfactory therapy, olfactory training kits on the market. After COVID, it exploded. Some are not so good. Some are very good. So if you are going to do this, do your research. Get yourself got a lot of good reviews. It looks like good, proper essential oils, or build your own. But it's very exciting. We started seeing the results, and we started freaking out. Yeah.
I mean, it's spectacular. How long do you do each smell?
20 seconds.
So 20 seconds, 4 different smells.
For each one.
Morning and night. And so you're smelling them, and as you're smelling it, thinking, okay, what does the sense of smell evoke for me?
Back in the early days, they weren't looking at cognition. It was just sense of smell. So they weren't telling you to do that. Just smell those odors, and that can help. That's a motor act, sniffing. So that's already a good thing. It's like mindfulness a little bit. But later, as we started getting in, let's check this cognitive stuff. So I really spoke with each participant every few weeks. How's it going? Think about those connections. Pull those connections, because you can see those synapses popping. So get that going. It's like exercise your muscles. You use it or lose it in the brain. It's very much like that. And so I did want to point out.
Oh, go ahead.
One last thing. What we see is about 30 to 60% will see improvements in their sense of smell. The data is coming out on cognition. We don't have a ton of it yet, but we are seeing improvements. The reason can be, these are research studies. Are they compliant? Are they doing it every day like they're supposed to? People forget, right? It is what it is. But is that why? But nonetheless, let's say you could help 40, 50%. That's a huge amount of people.
Something that takes a minute in the morning and a minute in the afternoon, or a minute and a half with everything. And I'm curious, because what you're saying, what you've added, that concept of reflecting on what is this smell evoking, do you just do that for yourself, or are you invited to share it with somebody? Like, what the smell is to express to somebody, this smell is making me think of my grandmother's cookies when she was making gingerbread.
I love that idea, and I was giving this talk to clinician because I also need to get the ENT support, get neurologist support, and they seem to be quite excited. But anyway, one of them brought that up, and that's like a lock, Magda. So sure, that's a great idea. Or you wrote it down. Those kind of things.
And then it's another motion,
So definitely you could be doing things like that. For sure, could be helpful. Yeah.
So what you said, actually, we were talking with somebody in our last episode who studies speech, and she's speaking about the connection of speech and dance, and how dance actually can rehabilitate speech, because speech is a motor function. And there's, surprisingly, thanks to her research, there's actually a connection between those. So, of course, this is a motor action. I can't do that without using muscles. But again, I didn't think about that.
No. Yeah.
You also mentioned something, so I'm curious if there's a connection to smell and dance. Weird, but let's consider it. But you mentioned mindfulness. So you spoke about some cognitive benefits, right? So executive function, you mentioned visual fluency, memory.
So memory, yeah.
Did you also notice any shifts in mood or anxiety? Did people feel more calm?
So that's an excellent question. I didn't do that. You have to be cautious with how much you ask your patient to do. Already it's like an hour of cognitive testing and the olfactory testing and MRI. I did MRI, so I was already asking a lot. Anyway, it's already in the literature. Olfactory therapy is great for depression. They've shown some really nice work for sleeping, helping with sleeping. Anxiety, I don't work on that side of things, so that's a good question. But definitely for depression, they've seen, how do you pull it apart? Like, if somebody is doing better, feeling better, they're going to be better. Overall, their brain's going to be working. It's like mindfulness, getting back to that. I saw quite profound changes in the brain because I had the MRIs because of the mechanism. I'm that scientist who wants to measure the change, and I saw things like that. So definitely we see changes in the brain. Even if you look at perfumers, so those people who develop perfume, they're smelling all the time. And those people, compared to people who aren't doing that, they have interesting changes in their brain. So definitely
kind of like a taxi driver, like that study.
That's right. Yes, exactly, with the hippocampus. That's right. Yes,
wow. Exactly. You spoke about these functional measures of cognitive ability, right? So these executive function, memory, visual fluency. What did you notice inside the brain?
One thing I'll bring up, and it was so fascinating, in the ventricles, so that fluid-filled cavity in the brain, with aging and with mild cognitive impairment, one thing that we do see is those ventricles can get bigger. Now, is it atrophy of some of those cells or dying or what's going on exactly? But we do see that. I was looking at that. I did all olfactory testing, cognitive testing, MRIs. 1 year later, I did it all again. And then I did my olfactory therapy because I wanted to get a feel for those measures over the course of aging, over the course of MCI. What's getting worse? What are the ones that are standing out? And then I did the olfactory therapy. And it was interesting because after the olfactory therapy, like before that, baseline to 1 year later, there was changes in the ventricles. Yet after olfactory therapy, I didn't see it. So I looked that up. What's with that? And I came across this hypothesis from the 4th century, if you can imagine, the 5th century. And they were saying that's where cognition is locked and memory is locked into. I couldn't believe it because my work was really showing some very interesting connections. Like if I looked at cognitive scores and ventricular volume, you can't believe the data. It's ridiculous. Some things we saw, so arterial diameters in MCI, the arteries can start to constrict a little bit and think blood's not getting through as well, and maybe explain a little bit about cognition problem. What we saw with some of the biggest arteries going into the brain is that there was like a reversal of that. It's like the brain was trying to, okay, there was constriction. We're going to try to dilate that a bit. So that was fascinating because I did see improvement in cognition. So to see something by the MRI was just kind of validation that, okay, it seems like something is going on here. Like dancing, the MRI dance work that's been done.
Yeah. Am I understanding that olfactory therapy is helping increase blood flow into the brain, and so it's nourishing the brain perhaps?
Wouldn't that be great? I don't have that data, and more studies would need to be done looking at those things specifically. But certainly it's suggestive. I would say that the work coming out is suggestive, but more work would need to be done before we could go there. But it would be huge if this is true, because the vascular hypothesis in Alzheimer's disease. So if you could really show impact on that, that would be very big. Hopefully my study will encourage other studies to dive deeper into this. And all that cognitive work over the last decade is coming out more. People are seeing this. They're looking at it their way. So more work is needed there for mechanism.
Yeah, I love this. I'm envisioning a future where all of us are doing olfactory therapy and dancing. Nice? Yeah.
There you go. Yes, exactly. I tried to get Joe D'Souza. He does all the dance in Parkinson, right? Later on olfactory therapy, Yeah.
I love that, because again, you mentioned, and I think this is really important, and maybe this is a human thing, but we do have a tendency to think about that one pill, that one thing that's going to do everything.
Yeah.
How cool is it to be able to understand that there are some things that are so incredibly specific and so powerful? Now, if we put all of those together, then we've got a mega thing that's addressing all of the things. And it allows us to have modulation too, right? Like one pill, it's going to do even keel across everything. But this allows us to really personalize approaches and maybe up some olfactory therapy at some point, down-regulate it if we need something else. This makes me really excited.
Yeah. And one thing I do want to point out, Magda, is I have a problem with my sense of smell, if you can imagine, for some of the things I've been through. And I tried those 4 odors that I talked to you about, and I was still having some issues. There's other 4s you can use or other ones, I do think it's important to take from the odor prism. But if you're finding you're doing a couple months and 3 months, and then try the different one. And for me, I'm trying these different ones. It's thyme, jasmine, menthol, and orange. And I am seeing, actually, that's really working for me. And obviously, if you have a really bad association with cloves or, I don't know, whatever, you're not going to want to be smelling that every day. I don't want you to be doing that. That's not going to be helpful. So just to put that out there, that if you have some issues with one of those, then
I don't mean to laugh. That's actually very important that you mentioned.
A whole body of work could be done on that. Rose is important, I would say. So if you're able to do rose is an important one. But even then, if you're not, that's okay. Right now, I'm doing jasmine.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I'm not familiar with olfactory therapy. I've never heard of an odor prism. And you mentioned that there's 4 categories. And as you're saying them, I'm kind of getting a sense, right? One of them sounds kind of spicy and earthy. One sounds very floral. How did this whole prism evolve, and why? Why are these 4 categories so distinct?
So that's a really good question. Some of the early studies, they were just trying to be well-rounded, which I agree that's how it should be done. Now there's lots of different words to characterize an odor. You could have woody and resinous and floral, and oh my God, there's a lot. But to have some broad groups is helpful. So you're right. The spices are maybe a bit woody and strong and deep and things like that. Whereas the florals are more light and fluffy. You think, whereas citrus, that's kind of a category, and there's a lot of things in citrus, but that kind of more pungent smell perhaps. And then the eucalyptus menthol, there's not a lot for that group. It's that one that hits you like that. Exactly. And hits the back of the throat there. That's important. So, there's eucalyptus, there's menthol, but there's not a ton in that category. And I do think that category is important. So yeah, they're definitely broadening that. They've done a lot more studies. They've asked people, okay, here's 8 cent. How would you describe it? And it can get big at the same time, but it is important for us also to know, well, is, let's say, a woody smell, cedar, grounding, is that a good one? Maybe we should use that. The studies haven't been done, Magda. There is a Japanese study that used different odors, more related to what a Japanese person would know, like sandalwood. That could be very important, obviously. So more studies on the different types of odors. I'll just briefly say this. Rose, in terms of the chemical class, it's a monoterpenoid, and that's been shown, actually. It's really interesting because I saw these effects with rose can trigger neuroprotective pathways. That's literature was published, and I'm looking at my work going, what's going on with rose? So there can be, of course, chemicals that will trigger neuroprotective or not. Toxin will be doing the opposite. So it's fascinating. Once you start diving deep, you start to understand some of that mechanism, some of that back. Okay, now that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Well, I've always loved rose. Now I'm going to love it even more.
Well, good.
I was actually thinking about a title for this, and it's like, a rose by any other name would be brain health.
That's a good one. Because, stop and smell the roses. You know what I mean? But me too. I was trying to think, what's that catchy phrase that I can get people to do that? But people do stop and smell the roses. And it's so true. And it's also about stopping. It's that too. It's the smelling, obviously, but it's about taking 1 minute. And that's where the mindfulness comes in a bit too, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned mindfulness, but also being present. Yeah, being present.
Being present, yes, exactly.
Being present in the moment, and how much that driving through makes us start to lose our focus and our attention, which is so linked to our executive control, right?
Yes,
and our executive function. So now I'm starting to dance with you here. I'm getting it. It's starting to make sense. I love it. It's sinking in. I think it was the rose.
Oh, that's excellent.
I absolutely love rose. I have to tell you. Oh, my goodness, I absolutely love it.
I love rose.
I can't get enough of it.
Yeah,
so now I'm justified in smelling rose constantly. I need to buy those roses. I'm helping my brain health. I need to get that really nice rose cream. It's helping my brain health.
There you go. I love it.
And menthol or eucalyptus, which I love too, but you said that it's really important. Is it because of those sinuses? What is it about that particular?
Well, that's an excellent question, Magda, and I don't have an answer for you. Probably Professor Hummel has done some work on that, so I will look into that more. I do know it's about hitting that more, what we call the trigeminal pathway, and it's that feeling of the back of the throat kind of thing. Now, we haven't done studies where we just use 2 odors. Oh, it worked as well or not? It does seem like the 4, but more studies need to be done. We're just starting to understand all this. COVID helped a lot. A lot of people lost their sense of smell. Oh, okay, this is devastating. So people really understood, and now we want more research on that. So that helped, because there is so much more work I can't even tell you. I'm not even getting into the specificity of what I was telling you about. People don't just lose their sense of smell. It's specific odors. And so the question is why? Why specific odors? And what are the links there? What can that tell me about a particular brain region? Can that tell me, some of the earliest pathology is there? Because it's not easy to look into a human brain, of course.
Yeah.
And even by MRI, and never mind molecular slices, where I could look at a protein. So if I have another way to kind of hone in on that, this could be very helpful for therapies at the end of the day, because it's always about trying to get people to do things, but sometimes people just want a pill, right? They don't want to do all these different things. So it's just good to always have that in the background, understanding the earliest changes.
Well, I don't know. I think smelling roses as a therapy, if my doctor told me I have to go and
people
smell
agree with you.
roses, I would be very happy. I'll take a pill any day. But I also love that idea. Like when you go and try out perfume, right? You have a bunch of different perfumes and you go to your doctor, and it's almost like your sense of smell is a sort of neuropathology. Like
Hmm.
now you have to do neuropathology, you have to wait post-mortem to look at the brain. What if we could do a very direct, let's do this in the MRI and see is it activating or not?
So Magda, it's interesting you bring that up. When I was leaning, okay, do I get into this work or not? Kloindorfer put out a paper in 2015, and that's exactly what he did. So he put people into a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. So that means that you're doing something. So they're smelling something, and they're in the machine. So we can see that activity. We can see that blood flow. And he had people who couldn't smell at all. They have anosmia, and people who can smell. And so he did that test. And the people who had anosmia, they're not showing so many circuits lighting up, of course. They're looking at the olfactory regions, some, but not much. And the people who can smell, they're all kind of thing. 12 weeks of olfactory therapy, you can't believe the change, Magda. Not
Oh my
just in the
gosh.
olfactory region, but they also looked at the somatosensory and the integrative, 68% increase in the interactive area. So that's brain activity. Like that blew
Yeah.
my mind. I couldn't believe that from such a simple therapy,
Yeah.
12 weeks, that you could see
Yeah.
profound changes like that. So there you go.
Well, there it is. I mean, you mentioned neurogenesis, so that,
Yeah.
and it's not just localized so much. I'm learning it's really about that communication, almost like highways,
Yeah,
being
it
able
is
to be
exactly what it
clear
is.
in the brain.
Yes, exactly.
That's
Yep.
phenomenal. I'm gonna have to see if you and I will have to chat. I would love to see some of these things if we have access to images. I think it would be so cool to be able to show if it's possible. But I'm just imagining. I was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible.
Well, I'll send you the article, but it's not the brain image because they have to put all the data together. So I don't know how many they had. 15 people can't smell, and then they put it together. Okay, that's what's popping out.
Wow.
And different ways that they do it. But yeah, that's what convinced me. Okay, I'm going into this work. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
I'm so excited. So, what's next? You're in your year of translation. I want to ask you, what's your vision? But what are some immediate things kind of ahead for you within this year of translation? And for our day to day listener, how can they get involved, whether it's with your research or with similar research? Or how could they take some of what we're talking about today and apply it to their day to day?
So we're really trying to put a focus on this kind of thing. But also we're looking at two things. One is the feasibility study. I want a public smell and taste clinic in Canada. We have private clinic, you do in the States. You can go to the private clinic, you're going to pay some hundreds of dollars, and they will test your smell and they will tell you about olfactory therapy. If you could delay dementia by a year or 2 years, you're saving millions in healthcare dollars. Each patient is anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 per year for the care. It's very expensive. So if we could develop these publicly funded, so you can go and get it, and I use the reusable olfactory kits, a few dollars a patient. I can make olfactory kits much affordable because now I'm making it for a lot of people. How does it work? What do the patients say? It's a study about that, not to see if it works. It's already shown in the literature that it works. This is about, well, how did you find that testing? Did you have any
Yeah.
problems? So we're doing that this summer. So we're pretty excited.
Oh,
The
that's
other
so
thing, Magda,
cool.
is I need that test. I need to pull out those senior who will get mild impairment, who's getting
Mhm.
Alzheimer's. So we're working on that specificities. If
So
I
it can be
leave
diagnostic. So it can be like a
exactly, a
diagnostic.
diagnostic
Awesome.
test. And then you would have
Hmm.
to do cognitive testing and you'd have other steps, but at least it could be a short, affordable
Hmm.
way to try to pull out some people. So if I can leave you with 5 tests, I would encourage people to look up olfactory therapy, olfactory training, see what they think. Look at the data yourselves. There's a lot online. There is some other non-pharmacological approaches that you can do. And those olfactory therapy, it's not just for successful aging. Mild impairment, that will benefit them. Alzheimer,
Mm.
Parkinson's, we're seeing that can help those people. So even if you already have some, it can be helpful. Some of the other
Mm.
things, Magda, is social interaction. Social
Mm.
interactions are huge. So if you can be doing that, that's really good. With people who do a lot, they go for coffee, they see their friends, I'll go for a walk. It can be something like that. Those people have less Alzheimer's. So social interactions are very big. Another one is hearing. If you're starting to lose your sense of hearing, your child notices it or your friend, go get it tested. Hearing's a big one. That's a modifiable risk factor. If you're wearing hearing aids, that can keep your hearing longer. Imagine your brain not hearing. Well, those pathways are not being used anymore. It's the same with
Yeah.
smell. Well, it's not being used anymore. Use it or lose it. It's kind of true. The other one is the Mediterranean diet. Olive oil, you can look it up. That's really been shown. And I'm knocking not just for a neurodegenerative cognition, also for cancer. So it's really an excellent diet. And then the last one I would leave you with, I spoke about it, is the olive oil. A lot of work is showing the olive oil, and also the omega-3s. So good for cognition. So if I could leave the listeners with some of those things, because not every therapy works for every person, right?
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. Maybe try to have a well-rounded approach of how you approach aging. I would say that we've seen this at my institute. Other work has shown that, let's say you're a couch potato your entire life, and now you're 60 and you're like, oh my God. Even then, it still makes a big difference. With the exercise, you don't have to go and be on a hockey team or something. Walking every day, getting out, yoga, going swimming, you know what I mean? Try your best to do a certain amount per week, every second day if you have to. Whatever you're able to do is really, really beneficial. So yeah, trying to do the well-rounded package. It's all good.
A gamut. I think that we should encourage people to have smelling outings. So go for a walk with your friend.
Love it. God, that's brilliant.
Let's go to the botanical garden and do a smelling tour. Be like, see if you can identify 5 different smells within the garden. And we're going to have people smelling dirt. It's going to be great.
I love this. That's a great idea.
New York, it might be a little bit dangerous because sometimes the smells here are a little much.
No kidding.
But yeah.
But you could do some workshops, right? And just kind of have roses there and different things, and let people
try to be like,
favorite?
Name it. Like, what do you think? Yeah. They have those games like an escape room where you have to like smell something to decide which flower is this.
Because you got to get people engaged, Magda. That's the thing, right? So how do you get them engaged? You can tell them about that and all this data. They don't do it. You know what I mean? It's like if you do yoga and now you do it every day. After like a week or 2 weeks, your body wants to because you're starting to feel so good. So it's that reward, but you got to do it. So it's how do you do that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. It's the building that habit, and then that helps encourage more motivation to keep it going. Yeah.
Yeah. But to build it into your daily routine, it's challenging, and that's okay. Recognize that. Give yourself a break. Like on the weekend. I don't do yoga on the weekend. Different thing, right? On Friday, I'm allowed to have that chocolate croissant or whatever, right? Because it's also de-stressing, so you don't knock yourself out, but let's focus a certain amount on that. Yeah.
Well, that's realistic and it's more adaptable and human, right? It's not one size fits all. I love that. So, Rona, we've been talking for a while and I've kept you for a long time, but I always finish with one thing. I'm a dancer and we're talking about dancing into brain health. So I always love to ask our guests to share a personal experience of an impact of dance or some other art form onto your life. And maybe how has it shown something magical into your life? So maybe, was there an experience that either you experienced or that you witnessed that made you recognize the power of dance or other art forms on brain health?
So I was very fortunate, Magda. My mother was the head of the art department at Sansa College. So I grew up with art around me all the time. And my mother did all kinds of art. So I grew up with a lot of artists around me doing art and seeing the effects of art therapy. And at the Alzheimer Disease International Conference, there was amazing programs on art therapy for people with a neurodegenerative disease, taking those people to an art gallery. The art galleries are very happy to help with that. And you see their faces and they're so happy and they're loving it. So yeah, I have a lot of positive memories from that. Not one, I have a lot, to be honest. And from dance, I am going to briefly mention during COVID, you do online conferences. What could you do? And I met Professor Joe D'Souza, who I know you know. And so he works in dance and Parkinson. And I just found it phenomenal. First, the patients just love it so much. Getting together, doing the dance. It's so lovely. But also, he's an MRI guy. And then seeing these effects in the brain, it's like what I have with olfactory therapy. I find it really incredible. So to be honest, I have very positive experiences on both sides. I think it's wonderful.
You're inspiring a vision that down the road, all of us will consider olfactory therapy, engaging in dance, engaging in visual art, doing this with other people. and creating this really powerful buffer and protection for our cognition from childhood all through our life. I love that vision. And I thank you for stepping into this year of translation and
Thank you.
and it's a new chapter. All of this work that you've been cultivating and being able to now inspire that vision into reality. It's super, super exciting. I imagine that there isn't necessarily ways to get involved with your research study that you mentioned right now, but I'm really hoping that when you have those results that we can have you back on, or at least do a little update, because I would be really excited to hear what some of the individuals who joined in, what their reflections on it were.
Me too.
Because I think that will also help us understand some of the things that we haven't even discussed. There's all of these benefits to cognition, there's all this neurogenesis, but then maybe people will tell us, oh wow, I ended up getting better sleep. We know sleep is connected to brain health. I found that I was so relaxed that I was better able to introduce more exercise because I really did feel like I had energy left at the end of the day. Who knows?
No, I'm very excited to see how easy did they find it to come into the clinic and do it, all that kind of stuff. Were they worried about anything? What part was hard? Remembering to do it every day. We need that information so we can move forward. So that'd be great. I'd love to. Hopefully doing it this summer, and it would be 4 months of the therapy. So it's going to be about a 6-month thing. I would love to catch up with you perhaps in the fall and let you know how things are going. That'd be great.
Wonderful.
And I could maybe talk a little bit more about that specificity work by then.
Oh, yay. Okay. Well, Rona, thank you again. I'm deeply, deeply grateful to you. I think you're amazing. I really do. I know we've been having a conversation about having you on the podcast for over a year. So I'm so grateful to you for being so persistent and joining me today. I think our listeners are all hopefully going to be inspired to engage with this magical sense that we all possess. And I just have one final question. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us today before we close?
To be honest, Magda, I'm just really thankful. I think this came at the right time. We have been going back and forth for a year, you're right, and a lot of things have gotten in the way. But I do think this happened at the right time. I really needed to get to that place for this year of translation to happen. I'm actually doing a workshop tomorrow on dementia, Elaine, so all of this is really good practice to be getting that message out to the public. So I'm really thankful. I love what you do. I think you're an amazing person. And I'm so thankful to have that tight connection with somebody in a different area. I think this is critical. I think that needs to be more supported.
Well, I'd love to hear about that workshop. If it's publicly accessible, please share a link. I'm sure there are also many more ways that we can help share the work that you're doing and more good things ahead. I wish you all the best in this year of translation. Thank you again for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
This episode of Dancing into Brain Health was edited and produced by me, Magda Kaczmarska, and Hillary Brown-Estreffi. The music for this show is the title cut from the album Critical Path by Joe Venegoni and Carl Weingarten. Show notes, links, and resources from today's episode can be found on the Dancing into Brain Health webpage and on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.